Hello, everyone. Good evening, and I hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to the Alumni UK Month Employers Workshop. Today we have Gamuda in this session where Mr. Justin Chin, Executive Director of Gamuda Engineering, today with us to speak about what will a career in the construction industry look like in the next 5 years and how can you prepare for it. Mr. Justin Chin graduated from with a first class honors master's degree in civil and environmental engineering from Imperial College London. He has 9 years of experience in the field of tunneling and is currently the executive director of Gamuda Engineering. So he has experience of managing of tunnel for 16 tunnel drives on the project. And Justin also leads Gamuda's tunneling digitalization initiatives, including the world's first autonomous TBM, which recently won 2 international innovation awards at the ITA Tunneling Awards in Miami and the NCE Tunneling Festival in London. I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Justin Chin to deliver the workshop about construction. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Hold on, let me try and share my screen. A very good evening, everyone. My name is Justin Chin, and I think before we start, I would just like to thank everyone for joining this session today. I really hope that it will be a meaningful and productive session, considering that all of you have decided to commit an hour of your time, so hopefully it will be quite worthwhile for all of us. So before we move on to the main agenda, I would just like to frame this session a little. As far as possible, I would like to make it as interactive and as informal as possible. On to the main agenda for the evening. I'll be speaking on what a career in the construction industry could look like in the next 5 years and how you can prepare for it. And I'll start by just very briefly introducing Gamuda and what we are all about, and to take you through my Gamuda journey so far. And hopefully from these two parts, you'll be able to pick up on a few key themes that should help us transition on to the next part of the discussion, which is essentially the trends in the construction industry in the years ahead and what you can do to prepare yourselves for these trends in particular. Okay, so Gamuda, who we are. Essentially, we have three main divisions in the group. One is engineering and construction, so that's primarily heavy infrastructure. If you're familiar with our group, we work on very recently the MRT projects in Kuala Lumpur. We also do property development, and the third of our core businesses is actually infrastructure concessions. So if you're familiar with the central area, we built the KESAS, the LDP, and so on. And we also own the concessions for these highways. We have, let's say, local and also global footprint. Like I said earlier, a lot of our business has been focused on the construction of the MRT lines in Kuala Lumpur in the past few years, since 2012. So we've completed the construction of MRT 1, and we are now building MRT 2. And for those of you who have been following the news in Malaysia, there have been recent announcements for MRT 3 in the news, and that's something we're looking forward to. We also have the first digital IBS factory in Malaysia, which is something I'll cover a bit later, but essentially it's precast construction where we cast panels or building components in a factory, and then we bring them to site and assemble them there. And this is one of the key themes which you will see is one of the big shifts in the construction industry in the years to come. We do property development, and in the earlier years, we focused a lot on rail and highways. But in recent years, we've transitioned a bit away from that to do, let's say, public transport and the like. And we also have operations in Taiwan, Australia, Singapore, and previously in places like Bahrain, Qatar, and India. Okay, so our vision and mission, if you can see what's on the screen, the very, let's say, striking word that we see there is innovative, and innovation has always been a very big part of our DNA. A a lot of our projects have focused on not just, let's say, open tenders. We have actually come up with our own proposals and proposed them to the government and also private players, and very often they've been taken up. So a lot of our early highways were done like that, and even the MRT projects was part of our overall, let's say, metro master plan, which we proposed to the government around 2010. So this is just a quick overview of the types of things we do. So railways and trains, IBS, like I mentioned earlier, construction of buildings, airports. So that's the Hamad International Airport, or in Doha, and we've a lot of our focus in recent years has been on tunneling, and we've built quite an expertise for that. But we also do things like water treatment and dams and so on. This is also a very recent project that has been announced. This is the Penang South Island. Some of you may have seen it in the news. This is actually primarily a reclamation project where we will reclaim 3 islands to the south of Penang. And the main theme for this island, let's say, it's green. So for those of you who are familiar with the term, and it's something I'll cover later, this island will embrace ESG principles, and we're putting like the environment and green first. So here we will put things like bikes ahead of cars. There will be sources of renewable energy and the like. Okay. So back to innovation. A lot of our innovation in recent years has been, of course, focused on the construction of our metros, because that has been the core of our business for the last few years. And we've won quite a number of international innovation awards, and I'll share a bit more about this later. And of course, as a contractor, safety is also very close to our heart. And in recent years, we've been really committed to safety, and for our metro project, for example, it's far in exceedance of the minimum safety required, the statutory safety requirements in Malaysia. So we've elevated the standards. We work at a higher standards, at a higher standard above local regulations, and with that, we've actually won quite a few awards from the British Safety Council in recent years. Of course, COVID is something that has been a very key theme in the last year or so, and we've actually been one of the most progressive private sector companies in Malaysia in managing the COVID risk. We've set out our own PCR lab, and we actually screen all of our workers every 2 weeks. We do 20,000 tests every 2 weeks. We have centralized labor quarters, and these have been redesigned specifically for the COVID era. So our occupants, our workers, and our staff have sufficient space to do their social distancing. They have individual facilities for each block, so they don't need to mix with each other too much and reduce the risk of transmission and so on. So particularly in line with these COVID efforts, in the last year, we've actually made it to the Forbes World Best Employer list, and we're the only Malaysian company to make it to the list. We ranked number 44, and we're ahead of people like Ferrari, Netflix, and so on. And from the feedback, we understand that it had a lot to do with how we really took care of our staff in terms of the COVID risk. Okay, so my GAMUDA journey so far. This part is primarily to give all of you a feel of what a career in construction could potentially look like. Obviously, it differs greatly between people and companies and so on, but this is my experience so far, just to give all of you a quick taste. I currently hold 2 main roles within the company. At a corporate level, for GAMUDA Engineering, which is the engineering arm of GAMUDA, I'm an executive director. So this is a bit more of a business and strategy role. And in this role, I look at a lot of digitalization, ESG, and new growth opportunities, let's say. I also have an operational role, meaning this is my role on a project. I'm seconded to the MRT2 project in Kuala Lumpur, where I'm the general manager for tunnels, and I'm in charge of running the tunnel operations on the project. In the earlier introduction, I studied civil and environmental engineering and did my master's and I spent 4 years in London. And this was on a GAMUDA scholarship. So do apply for the scholarship if any of you still have anything in mind. If some of you are perhaps even first-year students, it's something you can consider. I started my career on MRT1 as a tunnel engineer, and I moved up the ranks. And when MRT2 started, essentially I headed the tunneling works on the project. Okay, so just some quick pictures of my journey so far. So this is my graduation. I studied at Imperial College and did civil engineering. When I first started work, we were sent to Germany for training. This is what you call, the picture on the right. This is a tunnel boring machine. So this is what we use to construct the tunnels for the MRT1 and MRT2 projects in Kuala Lumpur. And because tunneling is such a niche field and quite a new field in Malaysia, there was limited local expertise, particularly in the early days around 2012. So a huge bunch of us actually went over to Germany to try and learn the trade. Tunneling is also a very, let's say, international field. So a lot of the supply chain, the suppliers for materials or consumables are from overseas. So in the early days, part of the procurement process, we got to travel all around the world to visit suppliers and so on. Of course, in recent years, we've built up the local supply chains. So a lot of these things are available locally now, and that's part of how we run the project, because we want to empower the local suppliers and so on, and grow the local SMEs as part of the project, so that we don't need to look overseas for these supplies. This is this is my first construction site. This is if any of you are familiar with it, this is Cochrane MRT station. So this is MRT station on line 1. Across the road, somewhere here, this is actually IKEA Cheras. If any of you are familiar with it, you don't see it now because back then it wasn't constructed yet. But it would be quite hard to imagine that a few years back there was a huge 40-meter deep hole in the ground. Now all you see is just the roof of the MRT station. So I started my career as a tunnel engineer. This is a picture of the cutter head of a tunnel boring machine, which is what we use to, let's say, cut the ground. These tunnel boring machines are huge. This is just a picture for let's say, context of scale. They are about 3 stories high, and they are huge machines, couple of 100 tons in total. So it's quite an exciting, let's say, mix of disciplines, tunneling. So I'm a civil engineer by trade, but we also have a lot of mechanical and electrical engineers involved, geologists for obvious reasons. And because primarily we are doing engineering, but we are also running essentially a production line. We are digging the ground and we are building a tunnel behind it. So a lot of mechanical and electrical engineers are also involved. So this is a picture of our breakthrough. This is what happens when the tunnel reaches the other end, when it starts the tunnel drive, does 1 or 2 kilometers and reaches that end. So this is usually the highlight of the early days of my career, because it's quite good feeling when you see the tunnel boring machine actually reach the other end. Couple of the drives. And this was the last breakthrough we had on MRT1. This is at Pasar Seni station. In line 1 also, we won a couple of innovation awards. So this is one of the awards we won for the innovation of our variable density TBM. Without going into too much detail, it's essentially a new type of tunnel boring machine which we developed specifically for the tunneling works in Kuala Lumpur, and we won one international award in London. Also, because the project is a very high-profile project, we actually get quite a lot of news coverage, and as a young engineer, it was quite fun to actually get to be in the news quite often. It's also honestly a very dirty job. So this is a picture of me. This is a TBM cutter head. So what happens is as the TBM mines through the ground, the cutting tools which cut through the ground get worn down. And because we are excavating 30 meters underground, we are, let's say, the groundwater is all around us. So this chamber is actually pressurized, so to keep the water out. And for those of you who like to do diving, this is actually this picture was taken at 3 bars. So this is equivalent of being 30 meters underwater. So we actually need very special training, and there are quite a lot of risks associated with it. But as you can see, it's quite a dirty job. It's very hands-on if you like that. Also, health and safety is a very key part of our work. So we actually go through quite a lot of health and safety training. This is actually firefighting training. So we even go to the extent of training our people to fight fires, because when you're so deep underground, by the time help comes, it's a bit too late. This is a typical picture of what you would expect in tunnel construction. So it's hot, it's humid, and it's quite a confined space. But other than that, apart from construction, as part of our work in GAMUDA, we also quite focused on enriching communities. So this is some of the work we've done as part of my let's say engineering career with GAMUDA. This is when we built a house for some orang aslis in Pahang. This is also another project where we actually built a greenhouse. We designed and built a greenhouse, and we constructed it by hand because there was no power in the region. This is near Tasik Chini in Pahang. So we built this greenhouse for the orang asli community there. And this is one of the more, let's say, fulfilling parts of my career, which I quite enjoyed. We built this greenhouse, and they used it to plant their seedlings and do organic farming. So this is some of the produce that has come out of this project. And actually, the community now is self-sustaining. They sell all of these organic produce to Jaya Grocer. So if you actually look for this OA Organics, this is something you can see in Jaya Grocer, and I think it's really changed the lives of quite a few communities in the area. Apart from the dirty work, unfortunately, there's also a lot of paperwork. A lot of young engineers don't like this very much, but that's just the nature of the work. Projects are quite cyclical. So what you need to do is you need to tender for the project, you need to win the project, you need to deliver the project. Sometimes there's maintenance after that, and after that you need to go and win new projects to keep the company going. So there are parts of my career where I'm stuck in the office churning out paper. There are parts of the career where I'm down and dirty, getting my hands dirty, and so on. Of course, also as engineers, there's a lot of continuous learning and development. So we participate a lot in global conferences. So this is, for example, one of the conferences I presented in Singapore. This was a specific geotechnical conference in Hanoi. And okay, this will lead into the next bit of my presentation where we talk about construction trends. So this was actually one of the highlights of my career. At the end of 2019, we won 2 International Innovation Awards for our autonomous TBMs. So our tunnel boring machines, which were used to build the tunnels in Kuala Lumpur, we essentially made them autonomous, driverless. So this was the pitch we had in Miami, and we won the Innovation Award at awarded by the International Tunneling Association. And this was the second award that we won. This is by the New Civil Engineer. So this is a magazine by the ICE in the UK, and it was quite nice to go back to London, meet some old friends and go back to my old university and see the sites, because I've not been back for quite a number of years. So these were the two awards we won, and this will lead us to the next bit of my presentation. So one of the very key shifts in the construction industry is in digitalization. When we first started the project, line 1, and because we built so much infrastructure in such a short number of years, we actually had trouble looking for competent TBM operators. This is a very niche skill set, let's say, and because it's so niche, it's very difficult to find good operators. So we embarked on this journey where when we looked in-house. We looked for a couple of engineers who had some coding skills out of university, and we built sort of like a data team. And over the next couple of years, we developed this autonomous TBM, which essentially it's a plug-and-play system which controls the TBM using artificial intelligence. So it's just a little box which you plug into the TBM, and it drives the TBM for us. So this is the story is interesting because initially the team that I worked with to develop this, all of them were bread and butter civil or mechanical engineers. One of the key developers of this system, what happened is on site he tripped and fell and he broke his shoulder. So at that point in time, with a broken arm, obviously you cannot work on site. So I recruited this guy, and because he had some basic coding skills, we set him on a journey to pick up more coding skills and build let's say a coding AI machine learning team. And in the next few years, we progressively built this autonomous TBM, and it was quite a journey, but these digital skill sets are not typically found in construction companies. You find a lot of these in these kind of people in tech companies, even in banking, but construction typically has been what we call a digital dinosaur. It's one of the bottom three if you look at industries in terms of how digitalized you are, construction is one of the bottom three. So in construction, people typically rely on experience. Everything is very manual. Okay, so this is one of the key shifts which we will see in the next few years. Okay, so after the autonomous TBM, we continued building on that, and as innovation is quite a key theme in our group, we now actually have a specialized innovation arm which focuses on a lot of digital technologies, which we will cover in a bit. So if you look at the construction industry trends in the coming years, okay, so if we have a quick look at this, okay, I'm going to pick up a few key themes. Okay, so if you look here, German railway bridges are more than 1 in 3 German railway bridges are more than 100 years old. So eventual maintenance will be one of the key themes in the future. Okay. We are also the #1 consumer of raw materials in the construction industry. Just cement and steel, the use of cement and steel actually contributes to about 10% of the global carbon emissions just from the production of steel and cement. So of course, climate change is a very key theme in the coming years. Let's see what else is here. So here, affordable housing. That's also a very key theme in the coming years. What else is here? Let's see. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is also just a slightly different representation of the previous slide. So in terms of impact and importance in the construction industry in the coming years, we can see climate and energy and climate change way up here, aging and the need for new infrastructure, increased complexity in projects, housing crisis, so that's the affordable housing. Talent shortage, for example, like I mentioned earlier, the lack of skilled TBM operators, which was one of the main drivers of the development of our autonomous TBM. Health and safety, also something I covered earlier. And also even things like cyber threats. So in the new digital world, cyber threats are actually quite a real threat. Even construction companies are targeted. Also, looking at new technologies in terms of impact and the likelihood of how these new technologies will start to shape the construction industry in the future. Those of you who are familiar with it, integrated BIM. So essentially, BIM is a technology that is used. I view it as a tool, rather as a tool and as a process whereby you are able to visualize your whole construction sort of in 3D. So you have a 3D model, so you can look for clashes, potential interface issues, but also within the model, you build in your cost data. So if you click on a certain section, you know, okay, how much this costs. You are able to also click on it and build in program data, so you can tell when this particular element needs to be installed. As you can see here also, prefabricated building components will also be quite important in the coming years, particularly because skilled labor is severely lacking, let's say. Not many people want to do manual labor anymore. And also productivity, the demand for increased productivity is increasing in the construction industry. There are things like real-time mobile collaboration, wireless IoT, drones, and so on. So a lot of these are digital technologies, which for me is one of the main trends which will shape the construction industry in the coming years. So in construction, obviously there are different phases as well. There's design and engineering. There's the actual construction, and eventually there's the operations and the maintenance and so on. So these technologies, like for example BIM, actually covers the whole life cycle of the project, and with this you're able to track the costs, the maintenance costs, the location of all your assets, and even the carbon footprint of your project, which is becoming increasingly important. Digital engineering, so this is the BIM I talked about earlier. With extremely complex projects, you have a lot of, let's say, interfaces, a lot of systems. There's the M&E, there's the civil works, there's the architecture. How do you plan all of this on a single platform? So this is what BIM technology offers. These BIM models, you can also complement them with different technologies like augmented reality, whereby you have the BIM model, you can upload it onto, say, a tablet, and then use the camera on the tablet with some reference points to actually show you where does this part go, and so on. So you actually minimize rework, you minimize clashes, and so on, because traditionally a lot of these drawings were in 2D. Now they're done in 3D, so you have much less of that problem. The use of drones as well for surveying, to pick up levels and construction data, and also eventually for progress reporting, which we are starting to use already. So the drones fly around, they pick up reference points, and they actually automate the reporting progress. So this panel has been cast, this wall has been cast, and so on. The precast elements and prefabricated buildings, this is definitely one of the emerging trends, whereby you do a lot of the construction in a factory. You cast your concrete panels in the factory, so you reduce wastage. You actually have much better quality control, and in terms of productivity is much higher, and the reliance of manual labor and it is much lower, and of course from a health and safety perspective it's also more desirable. One of the problems with let's say higher adoption of this technology in Malaysia is because the the cost of foreign labor is still relatively cheap in Malaysia compared to in a lot of other countries. So a lot of people are still very inclined to rely on foreign labor, but also with COVID and so on, I think a lot of people are starting to see the value of prefabrication. Of course, robotics. This is one of the robots we use on our tunneling projects to change the cutting tools. I explained earlier how it's a very dirty and risky environment, and as far as possible, we try and isolate the human from these environments and minimize the exposure to these more risky environments. So back to the digitalization story. We recently set up this digitalization arm in the group, and if you see the roles of the different people, you see machine learning, you see IoT, you see big data, you see cloud, you see BIM, and so on. So these are let's say skill sets which were completely absent in the construction industry even as recent as 5 years ago. But moving forward, these will be very, very important skill sets to have. I know a lot of you are UK graduates, and I also understand that, at least in my days, I'm not sure how it is now, but there was quite a lot of focus on programming, and a lot of people came out of their bachelor's and master's degrees with at least a basic programming skill set, let's say, and I think a lot of those people who had those basic skills have thrived in recent years, because these are quite new skill sets which are required in the construction industry in the years to come. Okay, so ESG, I spoke about this earlier, but perhaps this is a good time to ask the question. How many of you actually know what ESG stands for? Can I just have one or two volunteers to just try and explain to everybody what ESG stands for? Or if you don't know, take a guess. Anybody at all?
Anyone who would like to volunteer?
Quiet crowd.
Oh, I think they're quite shy. Justin.
Okay. Anyway, so ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. So this is quite a new central theme, not just in construction but globally. Investors are increasingly looking at this. So previously, a lot of these investors used to look at, let's say, just your bottom line, your company's profit, your cash flow, and your future potential. But now, most global investors look at what we call the triple bottom line. So previously, it was the single P for profit, but now it's people, planet, and profit. A lot of investors, let's say, actually are starting to divest, which means to pull their investments away from companies who don't bother about ESG, because climate change is a global problem, and it's something that all of us have a part to play in. And companies that ignore this and continue to pollute and build and manufacture without considering this, a lot of investors are actually pulling money away from these companies. So this is something that will become quite a central theme in coming years. So this is our GAMUDA annual report. Just one of the pages out of the annual report, and it's quite different in recent years, that sustainability actually takes up a huge part of our annual report, because it's such an important part of the way, let's say, we work, and the way we have to work, and the considerations we have to look at in the coming years in the way we do our work. So what can you do to prepare for these, let's say, upcoming trends in the construction industry? So this slide shows on the left, typically, let's say, the traditional roles in the construction industry. So we have people who manage projects, we have people who manage the plant and machinery, we have mechanical engineers, civil engineers, we have surveyors, we have quantity surveyors who manage costing, we have design engineers, we also have the frontline workers, the supervisors and operators. But in recent years, in the construction sector, there have been a lot of new skill sets required. So we have BIM engineers, we have software developers, we have drone pilots, we have people who specifically are sustainability experts. We have data engineers, data scientists, material scientists. So a lot of the traditional roles, they're not really diminishing, but a lot of new roles are coming up to supplement and to work towards the new, let's say, trends in the coming years. As in any industry, soft skills are vital, and as engineers, your problem-solving skills, your critical thinking, and your creativity in terms of being able to innovate and develop new solutions will be extremely important. And another for me in my career at least, I'm at least of the opinion that my EQ has helped me more and served me better than my IQ. So how you deal with people, especially in very complex projects where the interrelationships between 20, 30 different departments and everything, to get work done, you need to be able to, let's say, deal with people and build relationships and so on. Another very critical part of what engineers do nowadays, okay, this is a slide that I quite like, that I saw one day, so I'll just share it with you guys. So this is what my friends think I do. This is what my parents think I do. This is what society thinks I do. This is what the government thinks I do. This is what I like to think I do. But a lot of my time is actually spent doing this, making Powerplant slides. So actually, being able to present your ideas and summarize your ideas actually has made a lot of difference in my career, and it will do in many of yours. Because even if you have the best idea and you're not able to present your idea or to orate your idea or put your idea out there, it will just remain hidden. This is the picture I shared earlier, but just zooming into my shirt. So I quite like this description of what an engineer is. Someone who does precision guesswork based on unreliable data provided by those of questionable knowledge. See also wizard, magician. So as engineers, you have to have a bit of courage to make some assumptions and some guesstimates and so on. And if you only rely on pure facts, it doesn't get you very far in the industry, unfortunately. You have to have a little bit of, let's say, bravado. On the topic of ESG, ESG is a very important trend in years to come, and for me, the most important way, the best way of improving or moving in that direction, in the ESG direction, is to read more. The science of climate change in general is very complicated, and maybe I'll just give a quick illustration of why reading and knowledge is very important rather than just jumping into trying to implement ideas. For example, so like say we want to address climate change. So someone could, for example, suggest, why don't we go and plant more trees? Okay, very noble idea, but why doesn't this work? It's because to just sequester, to capture the carbon generated by, say, an average Malaysian or American, for example, you actually need 50 acres of land to plant 50 acres worth of trees just for one single person. So actually planting trees, while it sounds like a very good idea, in the big global climate warming picture, it doesn't really do too much. It's a very small step, but it's just in terms of of its impact is not extremely significant. Another example could be, for example, we say, okay, let's all shift to electric cars. Okay, in some countries this works. In Malaysia, it doesn't necessarily work as well as we may think it is. It might. It's not really because of the lack of let's say a charging network and so on. It's primarily because the electricity generation in Malaysia is primarily from coal and from natural gas. So even if you're using electric cars, when you're plugging into the national grid to charge up your cars, you're actually using what I call dirty electricity. So you may think, okay, I'm using electric car, I'm much cleaner. But the net effect of your emissions from using the electric car is not very different from using, let's say, an internal combustion engine, a regular petrol car, for example. Because in Malaysia, you have limited access to renewable energy. And hopefully this will change in the coming years. We've seen TNB making some moves in acquiring and also driving more renewable energy. So hopefully the mix of renewable energy in our total energy mix will increase in coming years. But essentially the point I'm trying to make is you have to do a lot of reading, and you have to have unfortunately, quite a high baseline level of knowledge to be able to make a real impact in this space. So I would really advise, as a start, if you're not familiar with the topic, this book, this is quite a recently published book, by Bill Gates, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. So it gives quite good context of where emissions are from, quite a good update on the state of play of current technologies in terms to address climate change, what looks promising, what is not particularly promising, and gives you a real sense of what really makes an impact and what does not. Other than that, there are a lot of online resources available online. I said digital skills are becoming increasingly important, and a lot of the engineers in our group, at least, they do a lot of self-development, self-learning through online sources, and of course, this is supplemented by on-the-job training and external resources. And once again, it's very important to build great relationships, with people, not just because you need their help, but you just continuously build rapport with different people across your organizations and external parties as well, because with such complex projects, you can't do everything by yourself. You can never have the knowledge to do everything by yourself, so you always need support from everywhere. And the easiest way to get that support is not by being extremely intelligent, extremely smart. It's by engaging with people and speaking with people and so on. And last but not least, invest in yourself. Learn, develop, grow, and hopefully that will help you in your careers. And that's the end of my presentation. I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Justin. That's a very well-rounded presentation, because in the end, you touch also on graduate employability factors, and especially for all graduates listening to our session today, it's very important that I completely agree with you. You need to ask for others for help. You cannot do all this alone, and it does make a huge difference when we ask for help, actually. Okay, looking at these questions on the chat box, there's Brinda asking that GAMUDA seems to ensure a lot of climate and environmental issues are being addressed in your projects you have shown in your presentation just now. What do you think of how can other companies to follow this, and how can they also do better, or maybe government should play a role? What do you think about it?
Okay, so it's a very good question. Thank you, Brinda. Okay, one of the main problems is, unfortunately, Malaysia is quite a few years behind a lot of people. Okay, there's the Paris Agreement where global governments have signed up to achieve certain, let's say, carbon reduction targets, Malaysia doesn't really have its own roadmap, unfortunately, and it's quite tragic. So when the demand in general of the government is so low, in specific industries like construction, it's also very low. We like to believe we're at the forefront of this, but actually we're still quite early in our, let's say, environmental and green journey. Okay, unfortunately, a lot of this also depends on let's say the supply chain. Okay, so for example, uh, those of you who are civil engineers, okay, steel and cement, okay, there is no supplier for green steel in Malaysia at all because there is no demand for it. Most projects, we don't even measure our carbon footprint. Okay, so green steel involves new manufacturing processes and alternative fuels. Like some of the green steel manufacturers use hydrogen as a fuel source. This is also not available in Malaysia. So unfortunately, as a first mover in this space, even we find it extremely difficult to make an impact. So I think just globally, because for countries that don't move in this, let's say, green direction, or countries that don't pay attention to this, to climate change and don't take the necessary steps, I think globally other countries will start to impose sanctions on them, trade sanctions and all that. So uh, the government will eventually be forced into playing ball, let's say. So like, as you can see in recent years, TNB has started to make some moves into the renewable space, where we're implementing more solar projects, for example. So unfortunately, it's not just the will that we want to have, because all of these also essentially have costs associated with it.
Yeah.
So it's a balance of that, and as the whole country moves together, these costs will come down. So I think it's more of awareness and so on, but unfortunately, we also have to meet the market where it is. So it's quite challenging. So I think it's just generally improving awareness in your employees, in the industry, and also pushing the government to hopefully move a bit faster.
Yep. Yep. In summary, it's all the policymakers, the players itself,
Correct.
practitioners,
Policy
all in
plays
one.
a huge part in it, and if you if you read the Bill Gates book, policy is also one of the sections that is covered, and the importance of this is highlighted in the book. If you want, you can actually go on Amazon. I think on Audible you can get one free audio book and download the book for free and just listen to it while you're working out or
I
whatever.
will. I think I will, and also all the audience. I think I took a pictures now, but since you mentioned it's in Amazon, I'll
Yeah.
do that. I want to moving to the next question. I think Shavika Sobri. I'm going to pursue MSc, Master in Science in Advanced Construction Technologies at BIM in the UK. I hope 3 and 5 years in time, Malaysia will implement fully BIM or having our own advanced technology. I'm not pretty sure what is BIM, but yeah. Justin.
So I think BIM is really picking up pace in Malaysia. So on MRT2, we are actually UK BIM level 2 certified. But unfortunately, the rest of the industry is still slightly slow to let's say, jump on the bandwagon. Okay. When we first started using BIM, the design consultants, unfortunately, a lot of them didn't even have this capability. So we had to rely on a few big design consultants. We had to develop our own in-house BIM team and BIM specialists. Some of them were expats, unfortunately, because there wasn't enough, let's say, local expertise. But of course, we've worked over the years to try and transfer these let's say, skills to more of our local people, and eventually over the years the local consultants have started moving up in let's say the BIM knowledge ladder, but it's still quite there's still a lot of room for growth in the area, and uh, it's something that's really picking up around the world. So I think it's a good move to actually go for your MSc in this, and yeah. and you should be able to find a job quite easily when you come back, if you choose to come back.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with Justin. Justin said, play the long-term game. I think it will be the best because it's the future. Also, another questions: do Chargement play a significant role in these digital ages?
Sorry, what's the question?
Do Chargement play a significant role in these digital ages?
Chargement, is that right?
Yep.
Chargeman. Yeah, okay. So let's say, okay, so Chargement typically deal with like high voltage. It's a very specific let's say certification. So they deal with very high voltage. They have the different categories of Chargement and deal with high voltage, let's say, systems. And as cities grow bigger and everything, I think there's a lot more demand for this. So, like for example, as cities grow bigger, there's more digital infrastructure, for example, smart cities and everything. While that will reduce the energy demand, that also, let's say, increases the scope for these skill sets. Particularly in digitalization, whether Chargeman will have a big part to play. Maybe not exactly, but just the general growth of infrastructure and so on, that there should be some scope to explore there. Like for example, our tunnel boring machines, they actually work on they work on electricity, and we actually have to go and install specific 33 kilowatt high voltage, totally separate networks to power our TBM. So we have specialized Chargemen and everything to also manage that. So I think that there's definitely room for growth in that area.
Thank you, Justin. Another questions, or recently we heard a lot of viral news of the safety issue in the construction, and I think if I'm not mistaken, that's a highway construction, not MRT or LRT.
Right.
So but on behalf of the graduates, should they be concerned of working as civil engineer, or whether they should not be concerned because there's an error in all of these projects. There's some errors, but percentage of it. But yeah, I appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, I also think in terms of health and safety, the general construction industry in Malaysia has quite a bit to mature, let's say. Like if you go on a construction site in the UK, near impossible you would see someone without a hard hat. But in Malaysia, if you go on a random construction site, there's every chance you still see someone without a hard hat, sometimes even in slippers. That would be totally unacceptable in the UK. In the UK, they even provide you they call it barrier cream. Essentially, that's sunscreen before you go on site. Okay, in Malaysia, all of that doesn't happen. But I think as GAMUDA specifically, we've really been trying to elevate those standards, and because we're working on such big projects, we also mandate these higher than local statutory and regulatory requirements in safety, and hopefully everybody joins us as well. So a lot of the let's say the subcontractors and so on, in the early days, they complained. They said, oh, it's very safe, it's very expensive to meet your safety standards. Okay, but if you look at it in the big picture, good safety is actually good business. You have less disruptions, you have a more productive workforce, and so on. So yes, it to a certain extent is a slightly risky industry to work in, particularly if you're working at site. There are moving elements all around you. There's machinery, there's working at height, there's working in hot works, there's lifting works, and so on. Your question is, should you be concerned? I guess if you're doing any sort of physical work, whether it's manufacturing or so on, that there are risks involved. But if you're a bit worried about the risk, there are also options like working in a device, like for example, in a design office. You can be a BIM engineer, you can be a data scientist, and you're working in an office, so you're generally isolated from those risks. But personally, I quite enjoy, like say, the site life, and it really gives you a sense of achievement when you're actually building something and you see it really just come up and come to fruition and physically you complete it physically and that's one part of my career which I find quite fulfilling. So I mean, it depends on the individual. Some people prefer to wear nice shirts every day, work in an air-conditioned office and do a lot of technical work, and that's also fine. But it depends on the individual, let's say.
Thank you. It's a very good answer, I believe. Mr. Johar Davidson raised his hand. Would you like to ask directly?
Yeah, hi Justin. Thank you for your presentation. One of the questions I have is, I'm a second-year engineer at the University of Bath, and as someone who's interested in sort of like the use of BIM and prefabrication, IBS, as it's called in Malaysia, which is something that GAMUDA does.
Yeah.
As someone who would like to do sort of, a sandwiches are something that people do now.
Yeah.
Someone who's looking to do that in Malaysia in their sort of IBS sector, what do you think in terms of, I mean, you talked about online courses. What do you think would be a good course? And I suppose what software does GAMUDA use in the IBS sector specifically? Do you think that I should do to sort of improve my chances and improve my employability in this sector?
Okay. Specifically, IBS is, let's say, picking up. There are a few other players who are coming to the fore. Okay. It's just how digital it is, let's say, what level of automation. Okay. So one of the challenges which I spoke about earlier, unfortunately, is demand. So a couple of years back, the government was quite focused on affordable housing, but with the few changes in government and everything, a lot of the affordable housing rollouts didn't happen. So a lot of the demand right now comes from the private sector, but there's also a lot of reluctance to use IBS because labor is quite cheap in Malaysia, unfortunately. But people are starting to see the benefits because you can finish the project in half the time, you get better quality, and for approximately the same price. But I think there'll be a lot of shift in this area in the coming years, hopefully. In direct response to your question, in terms of software, unfortunately, there's a huge range of things that everybody uses. And it also depends on what your client and your design consultants are familiar with. So the whole range of Revit, AutoCAD 3D and everything, it really depends. To be honest with you, for me, if you're familiar with one, it's not difficult to pick up something else. Unfortunately, also, I'm not sure if it's the same way now. When I first came back to Malaysia, okay, one of the very strange things I found out was I had significantly better programming skills than a lot of people, but I barely had any drafting skills. Everybody in Malaysia learns how to draft digitally. When I did my degree, I only had probably 20 hours worth of drafting experience. So if you're talking about courses, I don't know how it is in the UK now, but I don't know how much exposure you get in 3D drafting and so on. So if it's something you can learn online, that will be good, because a lot of Malaysians come out of university from local universities with a much higher level of let's say drafting capability.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Jari, for the question.
Just out of interest, how much drafting do you do like in university?
So at the University of Bath, there's a specific module in your first year called Computer Applications.
Yeah.
It's a full credit module, and it's split between 20% Excel and then Python and AutoCAD. I think it's about equal for Python and AutoCAD. Python and AutoCAD.
Oh, so you learn Python in university now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a relatively small part, I suppose, overall, like in terms of the entire degree. You don't pick it up again like throughout the entire degree. It's only 40% of that module. So it's not too much. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but
okay, thank you.
Sounds about the same then. So we did quite a lot of programming. We came up with barely any drafting skills, and I just had to learn on the job.
Thanks, Jory. Thank you so much. I think I will take one last question due to the time we have, and Justin, it would be great if you can summarize this answer in 1 minute. how technology has impacted the construction industry nowadays. I think you mentioned a few times just now, but just to wrap it up.
Difficult to summarize. Things like concrete and steel, as disciplines in themselves, are already very, very mature. So there's very limited room for optimization and improvement. So a lot of let's say innovation that will come in the construction industry in coming years will come from digital technologies. I think that's a simple, quick answer to that. And if you're more familiar with a lot of digital technologies and you have skills to manage data and all of that, I think that will help you quite a fair bit in your career.
Thank you, Justin. I think we are at the end of our session, and I'm sure some of our Muslim friends would like to break the fast in a few minutes. But just to highlight some of your presentation just now, I completely agree of how you compare UK and Malaysia. I remember when I walked on the street of UK, they have a special pedestrian walk inside the construction, or maybe just behind it, which is really different than Malaysia. It's just I can just walk across the construction path or construction work, which is very, very different. Okay, so thank you so much everyone for attending the webinar today, and thank you so much, Justin, for your time, especially this late evening. I'm sure you are a very busy person, so thank you so much, and I'm sure the attendees say thank you to you in our chat box. Without further ado, thank you so much, and I hope everyone have a great day, great evening for the rest of the day. Thank you.